The war had dragged on for years, stretching across systems and devouring entire civilizations in its wake. The Dominion, an empire built on conquest and subjugation, had expanded relentlessly, crushing every Federation world in its path. They were a force of nature, fueled by advanced weaponry and a ruthless desire for dominance. No one had been able to stop them. Every attempt to resist their advance had been met with utter annihilation. The Federation, a fragile alliance of various species, was on its last legs. On the final frontier, at the edge of what was once Federation space, the Dominion prepared for its last assault. This was it, the final stronghold. If the Dominion took this system, the war would be over. The Federation leaders, huddled together in their desperate war councils, knew the odds. They had fought bravely, using every resource, every tactic they could muster, but the Dominion was simply too strong. Fleet after fleet had been decimated, planets reduced to ash. Their remaining ships were scattered, their soldiers outnumbered, and their morale shattered. All they had left was a fragile line of defense around this last planet, a line they knew would break. "The Dominion will be here within hours," one of the Federation generals muttered, his voice hollow. "We've exhausted every possible resource. Our fleets are depleted, our ground forces can't withstand another assault. This is it." The others remained silent, their faces grim. No one dared to speak because no one had a solution. They knew what was coming, and the fear that hung in the room was palpable. The Dominion had been toying with them, dismantling their forces piece by piece. Their strategy had been brutal but effective: overwhelm, crush, and destroy. And now, they were poised to deliver the final blow. A transmission flickered into existence in the center of the war room. It was from Earth. The human delegation had remained quiet throughout most of the war, watching from the sidelines. Though they were a part of the Federation, they had yet to fully engage in the conflict. Humanity had always been seen as the outsiders, clever and resourceful, yes, but militarily insignificant compared to the larger, older species that made up the Federation's core. "I can't believe they're reaching out now," one of the generals scoffed under his breath. "As if they have anything left to offer." The transmission crackled, and the face of a human commander appeared. His expression was calm, almost too calm given the situation. "We've been monitoring the situation. We understand that the Federation is in a dire state," the commander began, his tone steady. "We are prepared to intervene." The room went silent for a moment. Intervene? The humans? Several of the generals exchanged skeptical glances. Humanity had been a part of the Federation for years but had never once shown any significant military prowess. They had provided technological support and diplomatic assistance, but when it came to warfare, they had always remained in the background. Even during the most desperate moments of the war, they had kept their fleets withdrawn. "Commander," one of the alien generals replied carefully, "we appreciate your offer, but the reality is that we are facing total annihilation. Your fleets are limited. We don't have the luxury of false hope right now." The human commander's face didn't waver. "With all due respect, we have not yet revealed the extent of our capabilities. We've remained neutral up until this point for strategic reasons. But make no mistake, when humanity enters this war, we will end it." There was an uncomfortable silence. The Federation generals were baffled by the sheer confidence in the human's voice. This was not the cautious, diplomatic tone they were used to hearing from the human representatives. It was something else entirely, calculated, assured, as if humanity had been holding back all this time. But the idea seemed ridiculous. How could a race that had never been a military power possibly make any difference now, with the Dominion's war machine bearing down on them? "And what exactly do you intend to do?" another general asked, his skepticism clear. "We've thrown everything we have at the Dominion, and they've torn through us like paper. What could your forces possibly achieve?" The human commander's eyes hardened. 5 hours, he said, his voice unshakable. "Give us 5 hours, and this war will be over." The disbelief in the room was palpable. Several of the generals openly scoffed. 5 hours? It took the Dominion that long just to break through a planet's defense grid. What could the humans possibly achieve in such a short time? Before anyone could protest further, the human commander continued. Our fleet will arrive shortly. All we ask is that you hold your positions until we can engage. Once we're in the system, we'll take it from there. The transmission cut off, leaving the room in a stunned silence. For a moment, no one spoke. The Federation generals stared at the now dark screen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. They're mad, one of the generals muttered. 5 hours? They can't be serious. But as the minutes passed, the skepticism began to give way to something else, curiosity. What if the humans were serious? What if somehow they did have a plan? At this point, the Federation had nothing left to lose. Their forces were broken, their worlds in ruin. If the humans were offering even the slimmest chance of victory, what choice did they have? We don't have any other options, the lead general finally said, his voice grim. If the humans think they can make a difference, we let them try. We'll give them their 5 hours. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. On the other side of the system, Dominion ships were closing in. The massive fleet moved with an unstoppable precision, thousands of warships converging on the Federation's final defense. The Dominion's Supreme Commander watched the tactical displays, confident in their inevitable victory. This was nothing more than the final act of a long and brutal campaign. The Federation is finished, one of the Dominion officers remarked. They've put up a decent fight, but they won't survive this. The commander didn't even bother to respond. It was obvious. The Federation's defenses were crumbling, and there were no reinforcements left to save them. They were merely cleaning up the remnants of a once proud alliance. But then, something strange happened. A small fleet appeared on the edge of the system, approaching the Dominion forces with an eerie calm. At first, the Dominion officers dismissed it, another pitiful Federation attempt to delay the inevitable. But as the ships drew closer, it became clear that these were not Federation ships. They were sleek, fast, and unlike anything the Dominion had seen before. Identify those ships, the commander ordered, his interest piqued. The sensor reports came back quickly. Human ships. The commander narrowed his eyes. Humanity? The race that had stayed out of the war for so long, hiding behind their diplomatic neutrality? What were they thinking, sending such a small force into the heart of the Dominion fleet? They'll be destroyed in minutes, one officer sneered. But the Dominion commander wasn't so sure. There was something unsettling about the way the human ships moved, so deliberate, so precise. And then, without warning, the humans began their attack. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision. Their ships, though fewer in number than the Dominion's massive armada, glided through space like predators, calculating and deliberate. Federation officers, watching from their dwindling defense platforms, stared in disbelief as the humans closed the distance between themselves and the enemy. There was no hesitation in their movements, no wasted energy. Every ship in the human fleet had a purpose, every trajectory carefully mapped out. Dominion commanders, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force and technological superiority, were caught off guard. Their initial scans of the human ships revealed nothing extraordinary: standard hulls, decent weaponry, and shields on par with most Federation vessels. By all accounts, this was just another attempt by a weaker species to mount a futile resistance. But as the battle began, it became clear that something was different. The first sign came when the Dominion's forward strike group attempted to intercept the human fleet. Standard Dominion tactics dictated overwhelming an opponent with numbers, cutting off their routes of escape, and then crushing them in close combat. The strike group moved in quickly, expecting the humans to either retreat or engage in a frantic firefight. Instead, the human ships moved in a way no one anticipated. With almost surgical precision, the human fleet split into two formations. The first formation engaged the Dominion's lead ships head-on, while the second flanked around to target the Dominion's rear. It was a basic maneuver on the surface, but the speed and coordination with which the humans executed it left the Dominion forces scrambling. Within minutes, their lead ships were taking heavy fire from the front, while their rear guard was disintegrating under the pressure of the human flank. Federation officers watching from their command centers were in awe. They had fought the Dominion for years, but they had never seen them react like this, confused, panicked, disorganized. It was as if the humans had known exactly how the Dominion would respond and had planned for it down to the last detail. "How are they doing that?" one Federation commander muttered, his eyes glued to the tactical displays. "They're moving too fast. The Dominion can't even keep up." Human ships seemed to move as one, their coordination flawless. Dominion captains, used to facing slower, less strategic opponents, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Where they expected resistance, they encountered traps. Where they thought they had the upper hand, the humans struck back with brutal efficiency. And it wasn't just their ships that were causing chaos. The humans were using electronic warfare in ways that the Dominion hadn't anticipated. Dominion communications were jammed within minutes of the first exchange. Their ships found themselves isolated from one another, unable to call for reinforcements or coordinate their strikes. Tactical displays on Dominion vessels flickered with static as their systems were overwhelmed by advanced hacking techniques. Human cyber warfare teams had infiltrated Dominion networks before the battle had even begun, planting digital sabotage that now wreaked havoc across their fleet. "What the hell is going on?" one Dominion officer shouted as his ship's systems went dark, his screens displaying only garbled data. "Why can't we get a clear read on their position?" From the Dominion flagship, their supreme commander watched in growing frustration. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to go. The humans should have been crushed within minutes, and yet here they were, systematically dismantling his forces. Every attempt to regroup, to re-establish order, was met with another precise strike from the human fleet. It was as if they could see the Dominion's every move before it happened. "Reroute communications through secondary channels," the commander barked, trying to regain control of the situation. "We need to counter their flanking maneuver." But it was too late. The human ships were already deep within Dominion lines, cutting through their ranks like a blade through flesh. Explosions erupted across the battlefield as one Dominion cruiser after another was reduced to debris. Human ships, smaller but faster, wove between the wreckage, their weapons tearing through the Dominion fleet with unrelenting force. The battle was quickly turning into a massacre. And it wasn't just in space. On the surface of the besieged Federation planet, human ground forces were deployed with the same ruthless precision. Elite squads, equipped with advanced exoskeletons and weaponry, moved with terrifying efficiency. Where Federation troops had been struggling to hold the line for days, human soldiers swept through Dominion positions like a storm. Their technology was advanced, yes, but it was their training and discipline that stood out the most. Every shot they fired was calculated, every movement coordinated. It wasn't war, it was an execution. Dominion ground forces, known for their brutal tactics and overwhelming numbers, were completely unprepared for the level of resistance they now faced. Human soldiers moved with a speed and precision that rendered the Dominion's superior numbers irrelevant. Advanced drones, piloted remotely by human operators, flooded the battlefield, disrupting Dominion formations and laying down suppressive fire. Within hours, the Dominion's ground assault was in tatters. Back in space, the Dominion commander knew the battle was slipping away from him. His once invincible fleet was now in disarray, their ships falling one by one. He had never seen anything like this before. The humans were not fighting like any other species. They weren't reacting, they weren't improvising, they had come into this battle with a plan, and it was being executed flawlessly. "Pull back the second wave," the commander ordered, his voice tight with anger. "We need to regroup." But even as the order was given, the Dominion ships were already too deeply entangled in the human trap. The human fleet had anticipated the retreat, cutting off their escape routes and forcing them into a kill zone. One by one, Dominion ships were surrounded, their shields collapsing under the sustained human firepower. For the first time in the war, the Dominion fleet was in full retreat. And even then, the humans gave them no quarter. The human ships pressed the attack, picking off stragglers and disabling any Dominion vessel that attempted to flee. The battlefield, once dominated by the sheer might of the Dominion, was now littered with the wreckage of their finest ships. On the surface, Federation leaders watched in stunned silence. What they were witnessing was beyond anything they had imagined. They had known the humans were clever, resourceful, but this was something else. This wasn't just tactical superiority, it was absolute mastery of warfare. "They're dismantling the Dominion like it's nothing," one Federation general whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. How did they do this?" The answer, of course, was that humanity had always been capable of this. They had simply chosen not to show it. For years, they had played the part of the neutral, non-aggressive species, focused on diplomacy and technological advancement. But now, pushed to the edge by the Dominion's threat, they had revealed their true strength. And it was terrifying. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Dominion was finished. Their fleets were decimated, their ground forces routed, and their command structure shattered. What had begun as a final assault to crush the Federation had turned into a nightmare for the Dominion. In the span of just a few hours, humanity had done what no other species had been able to do. They had brought the unstoppable Dominion war machine to its knees. And they weren't finished yet. The Dominion fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, was now a shadow of its former self. Debris floated through the battlefield, the remains of proud warships that had been torn apart in the relentless human assault. For the first time in years, the Dominion found itself on the defensive, retreating from an enemy that was unlike any they had ever encountered. The panic that had begun to spread among their ranks was palpable, growing with every passing minute. From the command deck of the human flagship, Admiral Kane watched the tactical display with a cold, analytical gaze. The battle was still unfolding, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Human forces moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, coordinating strikes that left no room for error. Every Dominion ship that attempted to flee was intercepted, every attempt at regrouping was crushed before it could gain momentum. Kane's fleet wasn't just winning, they were dismantling the Dominion in real time. "Admiral, the Dominion's secondary fleet is moving toward our flank," a tactical officer reported. "They're trying to reposition." Kane didn't look away from the display. "They'll fail." He watched as the Dominion ships, in a desperate bid to salvage their position, began to fan out, hoping to catch the human fleet off guard. It was a bold move, one that had worked countless times against Federation forces. But against humanity, it was futile. "Deploy the drones," Kane ordered calmly. "Disrupt their formation." Within seconds, hundreds of advanced drones launched from human ships, scattering in every direction. These weren't simple automated systems, they were equipped with advanced AI, designed to anticipate enemy movements and exploit weaknesses. The drones slipped into the gaps between Dominion ships, targeting their engines and weapons systems with pinpoint accuracy. It was over before it had even begun. Dominion ships found their engines disabled, their weapons silenced, as the drones dismantled their systems from within. Across the battlefield, the Dominion forces were falling apart. Every attempt to rally their ships, every effort to mount a counteroffensive, was met with overwhelming resistance. The human fleet, though smaller in size, had turned the battle into a war of attrition that the Dominion simply couldn't win. They had never faced an enemy like this, an enemy that fought not with brute force, but with strategy, precision, and unrelenting efficiency. Back on the Dominion flagship, Supreme Commander Raloth was growing increasingly desperate. He had never seen his forces unravel like this. The humans were everywhere and nowhere all at once. His ships couldn't get a clear target. Every time they tried to regroup, the humans were already one step ahead, striking from an unexpected angle, cutting through their defenses with terrifying speed. "How are they doing this?" Raloth growled, slamming his fist against the control panel. "We're outnumbering them. They shouldn't be able to do this." His officers scrambled for answers, but there were none. The humans had made fools of the Dominion, rendering their technological superiority meaningless. It was as if the humans had studied the Dominion's every tactic, every strategy, and had crafted a perfect countermeasure for each one. "They're disrupting our communications, sir," one officer reported. We've lost contact with several of our command ships. Raloth clenched his jaw. Get them back online! We need to. Before he could finish, a new wave of human ships appeared on the tactical display. This was different. These weren't just the agile, fast-moving vessels that had dominated the early stages of the battle. These were larger, heavier warships, bristling with weapons. They had been held back, waiting for the exact moment to strike, and now that moment had arrived. Admiral Kane is deploying the second wave. A human officer reported back on the flagship, his voice calm and assured. Kane watched as his reinforcements moved into position. The battle was nearing its end, but now was the time to deliver the final blow. The Dominion had been broken, but there was still one last piece of the puzzle left: their command structure. Kane had kept his heavy warships in reserve, knowing that once the Dominion fleet was in disarray, the time would come to crush their leadership completely. Target the Dominion flagship, Kane said, his tone unchanging. Full assault. Human ships surged forward, their weapons systems charging. For the first time in the battle, the full force of humanity's military might was on display. Energy cannons fired in unison, sending devastating waves of destruction toward the Dominion flagship and the few remaining ships that still clung to life. It was an onslaught unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. Shields collapsed, hulls cracked, and one by one, Dominion ships disintegrated under the sheer power of the human assault. On the Dominion flagship, alarms blared as the ship rocked violently under the impact of the human barrage. Raloth struggled to maintain his composure, but it was clear to everyone aboard, their time was running out. He had seen defeat before, but never like this. This wasn't just a loss. It was annihilation. Sir, we can't hold them off, one of his officers shouted, panic seeping into his voice. Our shields are collapsing. Raloth stared at the tactical display, watching helplessly as his fleet was torn apart. He had always prided himself on being a master strategist, but now, facing humanity, he realized too late that he had been outmatched from the very beginning. The humans had never intended to fight the war on the Dominion's terms. They had rewritten the rules, turning the battle into a chess match that Raloth had never even known he was playing. Prepare to abandon ship, Raloth muttered, his voice devoid of hope. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was already too late. The human warships unleashed their final barrage, and the Dominion flagship crumbled under the assault. Its hull split apart, debris scattering into the void. Raloth's command was over, his fleet in ruins. Back on the human flagship, Admiral Kane watched the destruction unfold with a calm detachment. It was done. The Dominion, once the greatest threat the galaxy had known, had been brought to its knees in just a few short hours. What had once seemed impossible had now become reality. Humanity had not just won the battle, they had ended the war. All Dominion forces are in full retreat, a tactical officer reported. Their command structure has collapsed. Kane nodded, though his expression remained neutral. Order all units to cease fire. Begin recovery operations. As the human fleet began to regroup, the surviving Federation forces could only watch in stunned silence. What had started as a desperate, last-ditch stand had turned into a complete and total victory. The humans, whom so many had doubted, had achieved what no one had believed possible. The Dominion had been shattered, and the war that had raged for years was over. They did it, one Federation officer muttered in disbelief. They actually did it. But as the dust settled, a new understanding began to take hold. The humans had revealed their true strength, and it was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. In just a few hours, they had dismantled an empire that had taken years to build. And now, the galaxy knew. Humanity was not a minor player in galactic politics. They were a force, one that could end wars before they even truly began. Admiral Kane turned away from the tactical display, his mind already moving to the next phase of the operation. The war was over, but humanity's place in the galaxy had just begun to take shape. The aftermath of the battle hung heavy over the system. Dominion forces, once the terror of the galaxy, were in full retreat, leaving behind wreckage and debris that drifted aimlessly in space. Federation forces, battered and worn, watched in silence as the human fleet stood victorious, their ships undamaged, their formations still perfect. What had taken years of brutal warfare and desperate resistance from the Federation had been accomplished in a matter of hours by humanity's intervention. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread like wildfire. The once mighty Dominion, a force that had brought entire species to their knees, had been utterly decimated by a species that had been underestimated for far too long. Federation commanders who had once scoffed at the idea of human intervention now stood in awe of what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a victory, it was a total and complete dismantling of the Dominion's forces. Federation leaders, who had been preparing for the end, for defeat, were now faced with a different reality. They had survived. But they hadn't just survived because of sheer luck or a last-minute miracle. They had survived because humanity had chosen to step in. And that decision had changed everything. From the Federation's war room, the surviving generals gathered in a state of disbelief. The tactical screens that had once shown the overwhelming power of the Dominion now displayed human ships in perfect formation, hovering like silent sentinels over the remains of the Dominion fleet. How did they do it? One of the generals muttered, still in shock. We couldn't hold them off for more than a few days at a time, and the humans ended it in hours. Another general shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the screens. We underestimated them. We all did. We thought they were too small, too untested. But they were planning this the entire time. The room fell into a contemplative silence. It was clear now that humanity had never been what the Federation had believed them to be. The humans had always been there, watching, waiting, observing. And when the time had come, they had unleashed a power that no one had expected. They weren't just planning. Another voice added, quieter this time. They were prepared. They knew exactly how to strike, where to strike, and when. This wasn't a battle to them. This was a calculated victory. The enormity of what had happened slowly began to sink in. Humanity had revealed itself not just as a participant in the war but as the defining force that had turned the tide. For years, the Federation had struggled, losing ground, losing hope. And in 5 hours, humanity had done what the Federation could never have dreamed of doing. They hadn't just won the battle, they had reshaped the entire war. On the human flagship, Admiral Kane stood in his command room, his face calm as ever. The tactical displays in front of him were now showing a new set of objectives: cleanup operations, the securement of Federation space, and the monitoring of Dominion retreat routes. The Dominion was finished, but Kane's mind was already focused on the future. Sir, we're getting requests for communication from Federation Command, one of his officers reported. They want to express their gratitude and they're asking for next steps. Kane didn't respond immediately. He knew what the Federation wanted. They wanted assurances. They wanted to know what humanity's role would be now that the war was effectively over. For years, the Federation had been the dominant political force in the galaxy, but now, with their military crippled and their leadership shaken, the balance of power had shifted. Humanity had always been a part of the Federation, a minor voice in a larger chorus. But now, the chorus had fallen silent, and humanity was the only voice left. And everyone knew it. Prepare a transmission, Kane said finally, his voice as steady as ever. Let them know that humanity will assist with rebuilding efforts. We're not here to conquer, we're here to ensure that the galaxy can rebuild after the Dominion's fall. The officer nodded and began preparing the transmission, but Kane knew that the message, while important, wasn't the real question on anyone's mind. The real question was simple: what would humanity do next? The Federation had seen humanity's power, their strategic brilliance, their overwhelming strength. And now, fear had replaced the arrogance that had once filled the Federation's leadership. Would humanity take advantage of the situation? Would they use this victory to seize control of the galaxy, to reshape it in their image? Kane's eyes drifted to the large viewing port in the command center. Beyond it, the remnants of the Dominion fleet flickered in the distance, broken and scattered. The Dominion's war machine, once thought invincible, was now little more than wreckage. But Cain wasn't interested in conquest. Humanity hadn't entered this war for glory or power. They had done what needed to be done because they could, because no one else was left to do it. And now, as the galaxy looked to them, humanity stood at a crossroads. Back on Earth, the message of victory was received with both celebration and reflection. Humanity had known from the beginning that their entry into the war would change everything. They had remained neutral for so long, preparing in the shadows, developing technologies and tactics that no one had seen before. And when the time had come, they had struck with a precision that left no room for error. But now, the question remained, what did this victory mean for humanity's place in the galaxy? In the halls of Earth's government, leaders debated what came next. Humanity's rise to prominence had been inevitable, but this moment had accelerated it. The galaxy, once dominated by the Federation and its allies, now looked to humanity for guidance, for leadership. It was a position that came with power, but also with immense responsibility. The galaxy had never been at peace for long. War, conflict, and territorial disputes had always defined its history. And now, with the Dominion gone, there would be a power vacuum. But humanity had no desire to fill that vacuum with more war, more conquest. "We didn't come here to rule," Cain had told his officers after the battle. "We came here to ensure that no one else will suffer under the Dominion's hand." That message was echoed in the transmission sent to the Federation. Humanity would not seek to dominate the galaxy. They would help rebuild, restore, and stabilize. They would ensure that the Dominion's fall did not lead to chaos but to a new era of peace and cooperation. But the galaxy would never forget what had happened in those 5 hours. The swift, decisive victory that humanity had delivered would be remembered for generations to come. It would serve as a reminder to all species that while humanity had chosen peace, they were not to be underestimated. Admiral Cain turned away from the viewport, satisfied that the battle had been won, but knowing that the true challenge lay ahead. The war was over, but humanity's future had just begun. And in the silence that followed the battle, the galaxy collectively understood one undeniable truth: when humanity entered the war, they ended it. In 5 hours,